was 21 and I needed money badly enough to take a job I didn't want. Closing shift. Gas station. 3 towns over from where I lived. Sitting at the edge of a dark stretch of highway with a patch of dense woods running along the entire left side of the building. The pay was just enough to justify the drive. The plan was to stay a few months, save what I could, and figure out the rest of my life from there. The days were fine. Snacks, cigarettes, lottery tickets, the rhythm of a small store with enough foot traffic to keep your brain occupied. The nights were different. After 9, the lot went quiet and the darkness outside pressed against the glass in a way that made the inside feel like a fishbowl. Too bright in here, too dark out there. Every customer who came in after dark felt slightly off in a way I could never put a clean word to. Not dangerous necessarily, just wrong. Like they had come from somewhere that didn't quite exist. I had been working the closing shift alone for 6 weeks before that night. Nothing had ever happened. I had gotten comfortable. That was probably the mistake. It started with the phone. 9:30, the store was empty. I was restocking the cooler in the back when I heard it ring. I walked out and picked it up without thinking. The voice on the other end was low and stretched out the way someone sounds when they're doing a bad impression of a movie killer. Forced. Theatrical. It asked me if I was alone in the store. I almost laughed. I said something sarcastic. Told it, yeah, you got me. Then I hung up. I texted my friends immediately, asked which one of them was calling the store pretending to be a serial killer. They all denied it immediately. The usual back and forth. Someone said they were home. Someone sent a photo from their basement. I assumed they were covering for each other and trying to keep the bit going. 10 minutes later, it rang again. Same voice. It asked why I hung up. I gave the same sarcastic reply. Then it laughed. That was the moment things shifted. The laugh was quiet and completely controlled. It didn't sound like someone enjoying a prank. It sounded like someone enjoying something else entirely. Something I couldn't name. Then it said I shouldn't be rude to people who know where I am. I hung up. But this time I put the phone down slowly. I stood there for a moment with my hand still resting on the receiver. The store was silent except for the hum of the coolers. I looked out through the glass at the parking lot. Empty. Just the pumps under the yellow lights and the road beyond, and the darkness where the woods started. I told myself it was still a prank. Customers kept trickling in and the movement helped. People buying beer, paying for gas, scratching lottery tickets on the counter before walking out. Normal sounds, normal people. Every time the store emptied out again, I found myself watching the phone. It rang a third time at 10:40. The voice asked if the store always got this quiet this late. I felt that one in my chest. Not because it was threatening, because it was accurate. The store was quiet. I was alone. And whoever was on the other end of that line was observing it in real time. They could see the parking lot, or they were close enough to know what was happening inside without being able to see it. Either way, they were not calling from across town. I hung up and texted my friends again, this time individually. One was with his girlfriend. One sent me a time-stamped photo from a different city. One was at someone's house, 45 minutes away. None of them were anywhere near me. After the 5th call, I stopped answering. The phone would ring and I would stand behind the counter watching it, letting it stop on its own. Then a minute or two later, it would start again. 15 minutes of this. The store completely silent between rings, except for the sound of my own breathing. I started checking the cameras. 4 outside, 3 inside. The exterior footage was grainy and full of blind spots. The side of the building near the woods was almost entirely black on the monitor. I flipped between feeds obsessively, expecting to catch a face I recognized, crouched outside, getting ready to give me a scare. I saw nothing, but I started hearing things. A tap somewhere along the side wall, low and irregular. Then what sounded like a slow scrape near the back corner of the building. Then from somewhere behind the store, the soft crunch of someone stepping onto loose gravel. Deliberate, unhurried. The specific sound of someone who's not trying to get anywhere quickly. Someone who is content to just be close. Every time I told myself it was wind or the building or an animal, the sound would come again at a slightly different location, mapping the perimeter. That's what it felt like something circling. At 11:40, the door opened. The sound made me flinch even though I had been watching the lot and saw him approach, late 20s, maybe 30. Nothing about him would stop you on the street. Clean enough. Ordinary jacket, ordinary shoes. He didn't say hello and he didn't go directly to any shelf. He moved through the store the way water moves around something, drifting, pausing, appearing at the end of one aisle, then another. Every few minutes, I would see the top half of his face rise above the shelf line and look toward the counter. Not browsing, checking, confirming I was still there. I watched him on the monitors while pretending to organize the area behind the register. He spent 9 minutes in the store. He bought 1 bag of chips. When he brought it to the counter, he said nothing. I took it and scanned it without looking up. When I finally did look up, he was already staring directly at me. Not a glance, not a look. Direct, unbroken eye contact with no expression behind it. He held it for 2 full seconds. 2 seconds is a very long time when someone's face gives you nothing to interpret. Then he looked down, paid, picked up the bag, and walked toward the door. I exhaled. Then he stopped. He was halfway through the door when he stopped and turned his head back toward me. Without rotating his body, his chin dropped slightly. His eyes came up to find mine from that angle, and then he smiled. I have never been able to fully describe that smile to anyone who wasn't there. It was not embarrassed. It was not friendly. It was the smile of someone who knows exactly how unsettling they look and has decided to be as unsettling as possible, on purpose. It lasted maybe 1 second. Then he stepped outside. Instead of walking toward the pumps, he walked around the left side of the building, the side that faced the woods. He kept his eyes on me through the glass the entire time, still smiling. He reached the corner and disappeared. I pulled up the side camera immediately. I watched him around the building and walked directly into the blind spot. He did not come back out. I waited 30 seconds. A full minute. 2 minutes. Nothing. The tree line was dark and still, and he had simply ceased to exist on any camera I had access to. I locked the front door. I texted everyone in my phone. Family, friends, anyone I could think of. I told them there was a situation at the store and that if I stopped responding, they needed to call the police and give them this address. I barely finished the closing checklist. I kept my eyes on every monitor simultaneously and saw nothing move for 20 minutes. At midnight, I grabbed my things and stood at the front door. Relocking from the outside took maybe 15 seconds. It was the longest 15 seconds I have ever experienced. The lot was empty and quiet, and the darkness near the woods was complete. I turned and ran to my car. I was almost there when I heard them. Footsteps, fast, not running. Something more controlled than running. The deliberate slapping rhythm of someone covering ground at maximum speed without breaking into a sprint. Like they had done this before and knew that running looks panicked, but this doesn't. He came from the front corner of the building. I don't remember opening the car door. I remember being inside it with the engine on and my foot already on the gas. I reversed hard and cut the wheel. And when I looked in the mirror, he was standing in the center of the lot, standing completely still, watching me leave, with the same patient expression he'd had inside the store. No urgency, no frustration, just watching, like he had all the time in the world. Like this was not the last time. I called my boss the next morning. He reviewed the footage. He told me the customer looked normal to him. He said I had probably connected things that weren't connected because the phone calls had already put me on edge. I quit before he finished the sentence. I still believe the voice on the phone and the man in the store were the same person. I cannot prove it. But I was inside that building alone, listening to someone describe how quiet it was getting. I was the one who watched him walk into the woods and never come out. I was the one who heard those footsteps in the dark parking lot. Some things you don't need proof of. You just need to drive away fast enough. My name is Danny, and I have worked the bar alone on weeknights for 3 years. The place is a small dive off the highway, the kind of spot where the regulars sit in the same seats every time, and the jukebox plays the same rotation of classic rock it has been playing since before I was born. Most nights, it is predictable in the way that only a very specific kind of bar can be predictable. Truckers passing through, locals unwinding, the occasional lost traveler looking for something strong and a place to sit for an hour. I know how to read every type that comes through the door. I know the talkers and the quiet ones and the ones who want to be left completely alone. I know within 60 seconds of someone sitting down whether the night is going to stay calm or not. The man in the black turtleneck sat down after 1 in the morning on a Tuesday, and I clocked him immediately. Late 40s. Extraordinarily clean cut for that hour in that kind of bar. Black turtleneck under a long, dark coat. The posture of someone who has never once slouched in a chair. He carried himself with the specific kind of ease that comes from having never had to worry about money. Not the loud, performative ease of someone who wants you to know. The quiet, settled kind. The kind that doesn't need you to notice at all. He sat down and ordered something top shelf without looking at the menu. He asked me if I liked working here. I told him honestly that I did. We talked for a few minutes. He was attentive in a way that felt genuine. He asked good questions and listened to the answers. The kind of man you might describe to a friend the next day as surprisingly interesting. Then he asked what I did after my shift. I gave him something vague and started wiping down the counter. He didn't push. He just smiled in a way that suggested the answer didn't particularly matter to him, like he already knew something I didn't. He drained his drink, placed a crisp $100 bill on the bar like it was a receipt, and walked out without another word. I thought about the encounter on my drive home. There was nothing I could point to. Nothing he had said or done that crossed any line, just a feeling. The specific feeling of having been assessed by someone who was very good at not showing that they were doing it. I filed it away and moved on. He came back a week later. He brought a woman with him. She was mid-30s and dressed in a way that was slightly but deliberately off. Trendy in a calculated way. Like someone had studied what a younger crowd wore and replicated it carefully, but without quite understanding why any of it worked. She moved differently than most people who come into a bar, too fluid, too aware of the space around her. She sat down, and before she ordered anything, she leaned across the bar and told me I was so pretty. Her fingers brushed my arm as she said it, and stayed there a half-second longer than any casual touch should last. I thanked her and took a small step back. The man said nothing. He sat slightly behind her and to the left and watched the room. He did not look at me directly once during the entire visit. That was almost stranger than if he had. The woman asked me questions. How long had I worked here? How old was I? Did I ever think about doing something different? Did I live nearby? She threaded them into conversation naturally enough that I answered 2 of them before I realized what the rhythm felt like. Not small talk. Intake. She was building something with every answer I gave her. Then she lowered her voice and leaned in close. She told me she ran an exclusive private events company. She said she was always looking for young women for weekend parties. She said the pay was $10,000 for 2 days. She said it like she was doing me a favor, like I should feel grateful she had noticed me. I laughed and told her it sounded too good to be true. She said it was completely real. She said other girls just like me did it all the time. Her smile stayed exactly the same through every word, fixed and wide and completely disconnected from her eyes. She steered the conversation back in circles. Fun, safe, exclusive. The same 3 words appearing in slightly different arrangements, like she had memorized a script and trusted that repetition would eventually work. Then she said it. She said I should step outside for a moment, that there was someone who could explain the opportunity better than she could. Everything in me went quiet. I told her I was good. No softness in it, no apology, just no. A group of customers pushed through the door at that exact moment. The woman's smile slipped for a fraction of a second. Just a fraction. Then she turned to the man and they left without finishing their drinks. I called my boss that night and told him everything. He said to keep an eye out. He reminded me he was 15 minutes away. He pointed out that they hadn't technically done anything illegal and that the cameras above the bar were visible enough to deter most problems. I told myself he was right. 3 nights later, after closing, I walked to my car and found a vehicle parked across the street with its engine off. I could not see anyone inside. I sat in my car for a moment watching it. I pulled out of the lot. It followed. Not aggressively, just steadily. Far enough back to be almost invisible. Close enough to always be there. I took a turn I didn't need to take. Still there. I took another. Still there. My hands were completely steady on the wheel, and my mind was very calm in the specific way that only happens when your body has decided the panic is a luxury it cannot afford right now. I drove to the nearest police station and pulled into the lot without signaling. The car accelerated and was gone before I reached the entrance. I sat in the police parking lot for 40 minutes before I drove home. 2 weeks of silence. I started to wonder if it was over. I started to relax slightly, which I think was exactly what they were waiting for. She came back on a slow weeknight just before midnight, walked in alone, sat at the bar, folded her hands neatly in front of her like we had a scheduled appointment. Same fixed smile, same eyes that weren't in it. I texted my boss under the counter without looking down. She asked for a drink. I figured making it would buy me enough time. I turned to reach for the bottle. I heard the front door click shut. I turned back. She was gone. The bar stool was empty. Through the front glass, I could see a dark van sitting with its engine running directly outside the entrance. I locked the front door. The deadbolt had barely caught when something hit the back door from the outside. Not a knock. The specific impact of someone throwing their weight against a metal door to test whether it will give. Then again. Then the sound of the handle being forced back and forth. I grabbed the heaviest object within reach and called 911. I stood in the center of the bar calculating the distance to the front door. The van was still visible through the glass. Someone was almost certainly waiting on the other side of it. Headlights cut across the front window. My boss's car swung into the lot. The back door went silent. The van pulled out hard with a shriek of tires and disappeared before he had fully stopped. When the police reviewed the footage, they found what I had not known was happening, while the woman sat calmly at my bar making conversation. Two masked figures had been crouching beside the front entrance the entire time, waiting. A third person was at the back door. The plan was precise. Flush me toward the front through the back door. The two figures take me before I reach my car. The van is already running. The plates came back unregistered. My boss does not schedule me alone anymore, but what stays with me is not the van or the masked figures or the sound of that back door. What stays with me is the smile. How it never once changed. How she sat at my bar with her hands folded and her smile in place, while two people crouched just outside the glass, waiting for the signal. She was so calm. That kind of calm takes practice. I worked the overnight shift at a large retail store, electronics section. It's quieter than the rest of the floor after midnight. The overhead lights hum at a frequency you stop hearing after the first hour, and the customers who come in at that time are mostly harmless. Night owls, insomniacs, truckers grabbing cables and chargers before getting back on the road. I had worked that shift long enough that nothing surprised me anymore. That was my mistake. I noticed him because he wasn't shopping. Every time I looked up from what I was doing, he was nearby. Not in a way I could immediately call suspicious. Just present. The next aisle over. By the clearance end cap. Near the display cases at the far end of my section. He never picked anything up. He never looked at any product on any shelf. His eyes moved, only when I moved. I told myself I was reading into it. The store was large and quiet, and the nights had a way of making ordinary things feel weighted, but the pattern continued. He was always positioned at the edge of my sight line, always just far enough to claim it was coincidence if confronted, always just close enough that I could not stop noticing him. I reached for my radio to call someone. The batteries were dead. I was trying to decide whether to walk to the front and find a manager when I felt a hand close firmly around my arm from behind. I came very close to screaming. But before I could react, a woman's voice rang out across the aisle. Loud, warm, completely familiar. She said my name like she had been looking for me for 20 minutes and was relieved to finally find me. She launched into a story about losing me near the back of the store. She spoke with the casual ease of someone who has known you for years. I had never seen her in my life. Before I could respond, she leaned in close and dropped her voice to something urgent and low. She said the man had been recording me on his phone for the past 30 minutes. She said I needed to follow her right now. She said it with the specific energy of someone who has assessed a situation quickly and already decided what needs to happen next. I looked back. The man was no longer pretending to browse. He was standing completely still in the middle of the aisle, looking directly at me. No pretense left. I let her lead me. Her grip on my arm was firm and practiced. She kept her voice loud and cheerful as she steered me through the store, chatting about nothing, keeping up the performance of two friends navigating a large store together. I was genuinely grateful. I kept thinking about how rare it was for a stranger to put herself in the middle of someone else's situation. How lucky I was that she had been there and noticed and decided to help. I didn't look at where we were going for several minutes. When I did look up, I felt the floor shift under me. We had passed the main registers. The self-checkouts were behind us. The areas of the store with the most foot traffic and the most cameras were all behind us. Ahead of us was the warehouse section. Dim, quiet, mostly empty at this hour. And beyond it, I could see the side exit door, the one without cameras, the one that opens directly onto the side parking lot where the loading bays are, where there are no other employees and no line of sight from the store interior. I planted my feet. She kept moving and my arm pulled taut. I twisted against her grip. She smiled and told me to come on, just a little further. Her fingers tightened. I twisted harder, and her grip shifted but didn't release. She was strong in a way that suggested the grip was not accidental. She had done this before. The grip, the root, the friendly voice covering the movement. All of it had the smoothness of repetition. I screamed. Not a word. Not for help. Just sound. As loud as my body could produce. In a store that quiet at that hour, it carried everywhere. I wrenched my arm free and ran toward the front of the store. Behind me, she called out, first telling me to come back, then my name, clearly, precisely. The name I had never once given her. I didn't stop running. A coworker heard me from 2 aisles over and came at a sprint. I told him to call security without slowing down. By the time I reached the front of the store, my legs were shaking badly enough that I had to hold the customer service counter to stay upright. Security found neither of them in the building. The footage told the full story. They had entered together. The man positioned himself to keep me occupied and slightly unsettled while the woman moved into place behind me. Her face was angled away from every camera she passed near. His was not. Every movement they made in that store had been coordinated in advance. They had walked through it before. Probably more than once. They knew which areas had cameras and which didn't. They knew the route to the exit and how long it would take to walk me there if the approach worked. The police called it a failed abduction attempt. That phrase sat with me for a long time. Failed. As if the only variable that made it fail was the fact that I screamed at the right moment. 10 more seconds of hesitation and I would have been at that exit door. But what I cannot stop thinking about is my name. Not the man. Not the route. Not even the grip. My name spoken clearly by a woman I had never met in a store I had worked in for 2 years. She had not learned it that night. She had known it before she walked in, which means someone had looked into me. Someone had made a decision about me before that shift even started and then sent 2 people into my workplace to execute a plan built specifically around who I was and where I would be standing. I was not a random opportunity. I was homework. The man's face was clear on camera. As of now, no one has been identified. The woman's face never appeared on a single frame. I still work at the store. Different section, different shift. More people around at all times. But I check the aisle behind me constantly now. Every single time I look up, I check it. I don't know what I expect to find there. Maybe nothing. Maybe the same stillness that was there before all of this. Maybe someone who already knows my name. I want to be honest with you before I start. I never saw anyone. I never heard anyone. I woke up, and the campsite looked exactly as I'd left it the night before, except for one thing. And that one thing has no explanation. That does not end with another person standing over me while I slept. This was 4 years ago in the Appalachian backcountry. I am not going to say which section. I've thought about this. And I do not want anyone going out there looking. What I will say is that it was a stretch of trail I'd done 2 or 3 times before on my own, and I felt comfortable in the area. I knew the terrain. I knew the access points. I'd camped at this specific site twice before. My dog's name is Remy. At the time, he was a 6-year-old shepherd mix I had raised from a puppy. Off-leash trained, well-behaved on trail, and the kind of dog that simply did not leave my side in the backcountry. I had taken him on close to 40 trips by that point. He ate everything, slept hard, came when called every single time, and never once gave me a reason to worry about him out there. If you asked me to describe the ideal trail dog, I would have described Remy. I got to the campsite around 4 in the afternoon, a flat clearing beside a creek, hemlock trees on 3 sides, a fire ring from previous campers already in place. About 5 miles from where I'd parked at a fire road. Easy terrain, familiar ground. First thing I did after dropping my pack was get my food into the bear canister. If you have never used one, it is a hard plastic cylinder, roughly the size of a small trash can, with a lid that locks down on a recessed latch, requiring a coin or a flat tool to open. Built specifically so that a bear cannot access it, regardless of how long it tries. I sealed mine shut and wedged it between 2 tree roots, about 30 feet from where the tent would go. Same as always. While I was doing this, Remy went down to the creek to drink. He always did that when we reached water. I had the tent body out and was threading the first pole when I looked up and noticed he was not drinking anymore. He was standing in the creek with the water moving around his paws. His head was raised, and he was looking up the slope on the opposite bank at something I could not see from where I was. I called him. He did not come. I called him again. He turned and walked back to me slowly, looking over his shoulder twice before he reached me. He came up and sat down next to my pack and pressed himself against it and stayed there. I want to be clear that in the moment I did not read much into this. Dogs spook at things on trail. He had seen a bear at a different campsite once and had been jumpy for hours afterward. He had startled badly at a large snake earlier that summer. I assumed he had caught a scent or glimpsed movement on the slope and was being cautious. I told him he was a good boy and went back to the tent. But he did not eat that evening. This was the thing that shifted the atmosphere of the campsite for me. I made dinner as usual, one of those dehydrated meals you add boiling water to, and I put a portion in Remy's bowl the way I always did. He looked at the bowl. He looked at me. He did not eat. Remy ate everything. He ate things he found on the trail that I had to physically remove from his mouth. He ate his portion and then waited optimistically for mine. So when he sat in front of a full bowl and simply looked at it, something cold moved through me that I did not fully acknowledge at the time. I offered him jerky from my hand. He took it and dropped it on the ground. I checked him over. Wet nose, no fever, belly clear of ticks. He drank a normal amount of water when I offered it. Physically, he seemed fine. I told myself he had eaten something on the trail that was sitting wrong with him. I told myself I would watch him overnight and hike out early if he still was not eating in the morning. I built a small fire. Not for warmth, just for the company of it, the way you do when the dark comes in and the forest gets loud and you want something warm and familiar near you. Remy did not lie at my feet by the fire the way he normally did. He sat about 10 feet behind me, facing the slope. Not the fire, the slope. Whatever direction I shifted my chair, he maintained the same orientation, facing up the hill, ears forward, completely still. I started turning around without meaning to. I would notice I was doing it after the fact, looking back over my shoulder at the tree line and then turning back to the fire. My body had started responding to something my brain was still trying to rationalize away. I stared up the slope where Remy was looking. Just trees growing darker as the sun dropped. Nothing visible, nothing moving. I let the fire die down, checked the canister latch one last time out of habit, and got into the tent around 10. Remy came in with me, but he did not curl up at the foot of my sleeping bag the way he always slept. He went to the far end of the tent and lay down pressed flat against the back wall facing the door, body rigid, ears straight up, breathing fast through his nose. I put my hand on him and felt the muscles under his coat. They were locked hard. He was trembling slightly, a fine, continuous tremor that I had never felt from him before. I kept my hand on him and talked to him quietly. He did not respond to my voice. He did not look at me. He just kept his eyes on the tent door. I lay down and listened to the woods. The woods at night are never silent. There is a constant low layer of sound. Insects, frogs, small animals moving through leaf litter. You learn to tune it out the way you tune out traffic noise in a city. It becomes a kind of white noise that you sleep through without registering. That night, the sound kept stopping. It would all be running normally, and then it would simply cut out. All of it at once. 30 seconds of complete silence, and then the sound would resume. A few minutes later, it would stop again, and the silence each time seemed to be coming from a different part of the woods around the campsite. Like whatever was causing the insects and frogs to go quiet was moving. After the 4th or 5th time this happened, Remy growled, low and controlled, deep in his chest. He was staring at the tent door. I sat up and looked through the mesh. The fire ring was visible, coals almost completely out, just a faint orange. The clearing beyond it was dark and still. I stared out there for a long time. Remy kept growling. Then he stopped. The silence after the growling was worse than the growling. I want to tell you something practical that bothered me for the rest of that night. My knife was in my pack. My pack was outside the tent. My bear spray was in the lid pocket of the same pack. I had nothing inside with me except Remy and a flashlight and a single trekking pole I had brought in to use as a tent pole. My actual plan, if something tried to enter, was to hit it with the trekking pole. That was the plan I had formed. I lay there for a long time. Nothing came. The silence and sound cycling kept happening, but Remy had stopped growling. He was just lying there with his eyes open. blinking occasionally, perfectly still. At some point, I rolled over to check on him, and he had moved. He had come the full length of the tent and was lying pressed against the side of my sleeping bag, not facing the door anymore, facing the back wall. The same wall he had been pressed against earlier. I reached out and put my palm flat against the back wall of the tent. The fabric was cool, and there was nothing pressing against it from outside that I could detect. I pulled my hand back and lay looking at the ceiling. I was trying to stay awake. I want to be clear about that. I was actively trying to stay awake. But I had hiked 5 miles that day and spent the evening watching my dog refuse food and sit rigid with fear, facing a slope he could not stop looking at. At some point, my body made the decision without consulting me. I fell asleep. I do not know when. I do not know what happened in the hours between when I fell asleep and when I woke up. I would give a great deal to know. I cannot tell you. What I can tell you is what I found when I opened my eyes. Gray light through the tent fabric. Morning birds starting up somewhere outside. Remy at the foot of my sleeping bag, on top of my feet. His tail thumping against my legs when I sat up. He looked completely fine, alert and relaxed, his normal morning self. Something was wrong, and it took me a moment to identify what it was. His collar was gone. Remy wore a dark brown leather collar with a metal tag that had my phone number stamped into it. He had worn it every day for 6 years. I had never seen him without it. I checked the tent floor, lifted the sleeping bag, ran my hands through his coat in case it had slipped off and snagged somewhere in his fur. I unzipped the tent and walked the campsite in the early morning light. Checked the perimeter of the clearing, walked the creek bank, checked around the fire ring and around the base of every tree within 30 feet of the tent. No collar anywhere, and nothing that explained how it had come off. No scratches on his neck, no marks anywhere on his body. The hair where the collar had been was not even disturbed. It looked as though the collar had simply been unbuckled and lifted away while he slept. I sat down next to my pack and tried to think. I needed coffee, I needed food, I needed to calm down and approach this logically. I walked over to the bare canister to start breakfast, crouched down, pressed the recessed latch with my thumbnail and unscrewed the lid. Remy's collar was coiled on top of my food bag. The buckle was buckled. I sat with the open canister in my lap and looked at it. I want you to stay with me on the specific details of what I am telling you because they matter. The collar had not been broken. The leather had not been torn. The buckle was fully buckled in the closed position, which means whoever had removed it from around my dog's neck had unbuckled it, taken it off, carried it to the canister, which was 30 feet from the tent, opened a sealed canister requiring a flat tool or a coin to operate the latch, placed the collar coiled neatly on top of the food bag, screwed the lid back down, and walked away, while Remy was lying against my sleeping bag, while I was asleep beside him, while my knife was in the pack outside, and my bear spray was in the pack outside, and the only thing between me and whoever was standing in my campsite was a single layer of tent nylon. They had come in close enough to touch my dog. They had done something that required patience and dexterity and the specific knowledge of how a bear canister operates. And then they had walked away without waking either of us. I sat there holding the canister for a very long time. Then I started packing. I did not make breakfast. I did not make coffee. I rolled my sleeping bag without folding it and shoved it into its sack. I pulled the tent stakes while the tent was still assembled. I broke down the poles so fast I bent 2 of them and left them bent. The whole time I was packing, I was watching the slope. That same slope Remy had been staring at since we arrived the afternoon before. Nothing moved up there, just trees and morning light coming through the canopy in long, low beams. I put Remy's collar in the lid pocket of my pack. I could not put it back on him. I tried once, and my hands would not do it. I do not have a clean explanation for this. I just could not make myself buckle it around his neck again after what I knew had happened to it. We started the 5 miles back to the truck. Remy walked at heel the entire way. Not his usual behavior. On normal hikes, he moved ahead and behind and investigated everything within range of the trail. That morning he stayed at my left leg for all 5 miles. He did not sniff at anything. He did not stop to mark a single tree. He just walked beside me and looked at the trail ahead and occasionally glanced up at me. I stopped every few 100 yards and turned around to look behind us. The trail was empty every time. Birds singing. Morning light. A perfectly quiet spring day in the mountains. About halfway out, Remy trotted ahead onto a flat stretch of trail and stopped and looked back at me the way he used to when he wanted me to pick up the pace. Tail going, ears forward. Just my dog on a morning hike. I caught up and crouched down and put my arms around him, and he leaned the full weight of himself against me. Whatever had been wrong with him the night before was completely gone. That did not make me feel better. If anything, it made me feel worse. Because it meant whatever presence had been in that campsite, whatever had kept Remy rigid and trembling and sleepless for hours, was gone now. It had come and done what it came to do, and it had left. And it had not needed to hurt either of us to make its point. That is what I keep returning to. Not that it could have hurt us, that it chose not to. I got back to the truck just before noon, threw the pack in the bed. Remy jumped into the passenger seat without being asked. I got behind the wheel and locked every door and sat there for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel. I looked over at him. He was already asleep, head down on the center console, eyes closed, breathing slow and even. He had not slept once the entire night before. I started the engine. I drove for 2 hours without stopping. I've not been back to that section of trail. I still go out, still take Remy, but not alone and not anywhere that remote. Not anymore. What I think about most is not the collar in the canister. It is not the silent circling in the dark or the way the night sounds kept stopping and starting. What I think about most is the patience it required to move through a campsite without waking a dog that had been alert and trembling for hours, to perform a careful, deliberate act with a buckle and a sealed container without making a sound, to come that close and leave nothing behind except a coiled collar on top of a food bag with the buckle done up. That kind of patience is not accidental. That kind of patience is practiced. Whoever was in that campsite had done this before. Maybe not the collar specifically, but the moving through the dark without sound. The getting close without being detected. The leaving a sign that communicated something without words. I was here. I was close enough. And I decided how this ended. I think about that on nights when it is very quiet and Remy lifts his head and looks at the back wall of whatever room we are in and holds it for just a moment before he puts his head back down. Most of the time it is nothing, most of the time. I travel for work more than most people realize. It has taken me to some genuinely beautiful places, Greece, Italy, parts of the American West that don't look real until you're standing in them. A few years ago, my job brought me to the Adirondacks in the northeastern United States during the peak of autumn. If you have never been there in October, you cannot fully understand what I mean when I say the mountains look like something out of a painting. The leaves turn every shade of red and orange and gold, and the whole range glows with it. It is one of the most quietly spectacular things I have ever seen. My company would normally cover a hotel, but this time I wanted something different. I had been traveling constantly for months, and I needed space and silence more than I needed a minibar and continental breakfast. I went through Airbnb and found a secluded mountain home nestled back into the trees with a deck at the rear that looked out over a long stretch of mountain slope. There were jogging trails nearby. There was no noise. There was nothing but trees and elevation and the kind of stillness that cities make you forget exists. I booked it immediately. I arrived on a Friday evening and did very little, poured a drink, sat on the deck, watched the last of the light leave the mountains, called it an early night, feeling more rested than I had in weeks, just from sitting there. Saturday morning, I woke at 6 and went out on the trails. The feeling started within the first 10 minutes. It is difficult to explain to someone who's not experienced it. Not fear exactly. More like a change in the air around you. The specific physical sensation of being observed. I am a city person, and I know my anxiety. I know the difference between nerves and instinct. I told myself it was nerves. I told myself I was not used to being alone in the wilderness, and my brain was manufacturing threat from silence. I finished the jog, went back inside, showered, and spent the rest of the morning sitting inside telling myself I was fine. The noises were harder to dismiss. Not loud noises, not crashes or bangs. Small sounds, the kind old structures make when the temperature shifts or the wind moves through the walls. Except the timing was wrong. They didn't come with wind. They didn't follow any pattern that a settling building would follow. They came and went irregularly and from different parts of the house, and every time one happened, I would stop what I was doing and wait, and the house would go completely quiet again. I left at 3:30 in the afternoon to meet my colleagues in town. I am not proud to say that I stayed out as long as I possibly could. We had dinner, handled the business I was there for, went for drinks afterward, and I even suggested continuing the evening back at the house. My colleagues declined and turned in just before 10. I drove back slowly. I spent the entire drive talking myself down. I repeated it out loud like a mantra. It is just a house. Houses make noise. I am safe. By the time I pulled in, I had almost convinced myself, I checked every lock 3 times before I went upstairs, tried to sleep. Managed to drift off in short stretches before something outside would pull me back awake. Music helped for a while. Then the sounds started cutting through the music. Just past midnight, I gave up on sleep entirely and decided to go outside for a cigarette. I came downstairs in the dark. The stairs led out into the living room, and if you turned left, you reached the open dining room and kitchen at the back of the house. The sliding glass door to the deck was at the far end. I turned left and took one step into the room. There was a shadow in the kitchen that was blocking some of the moonlight coming through the window. I stopped. I stood completely still. I told myself it was furniture. I told myself it was the angle of the light. I told myself that if I turned the lamp on, there would be nothing there. I turned the lamp on. There was a man standing in my kitchen. He was over 6 feet tall with long, unkempt hair and a heavy beard. Late 30s, maybe. He was hunched slightly forward and staring at me with the fixed, expressionless attention of someone who had been waiting a very long time and was finally seeing what they had been waiting for. We stood there looking at each other for what felt like several minutes, but was probably 10 seconds. Then he came at me. No warning. No words. He simply launched himself across the kitchen at a full sprint. The kitchen island was between us and he had to go around it. Those 2 or 3 seconds were the only reason I made it to the stairs. I ran up, threw myself into the bedroom, and turned the lock the moment the door closed behind me. I could hear him on the stairs before I had fully released the handle. I ran to the closet. I called 911. I gave the address and told the dispatcher there was a man in the house and I needed help immediately. She stayed on the line and told me someone was coming. He reached the bedroom door within seconds. He didn't try the handle. He hit the door, not knocking, striking it with his fist over and over in a rhythm that had no urgency in it, like someone who was not worried about time. In between strikes, he talked. His voice was completely calm and completely wrong. He said he loved me. He said he had changed. He said he just needed me to open the door and let him explain. I have never met this man in my life. I yelled that he had the wrong person, that I didn't know him, that he needed to stop. He couldn't hear me or he didn't care. He just kept talking about love and forgiveness and starting over while his fist came through the wood of the door in pieces. I was watching the hole grow larger when I heard the sirens. I heard cars in the driveway. I heard the front door come open. I heard police voices and then the specific sound of a heavy body being taken to the floor. The moment the door stopped shaking, I went to the bedroom window, climbed out onto the small roof section below it, and stayed there until an officer helped me down. They had him in the back of a cruiser by the time I reached the ground. He was still talking, still calm, still saying things about love to no one in particular through the window. The police called the owner of the house. She answered immediately, and when they described the man, her voice changed entirely. He was her ex-fiancé. He had gone off the grid after their breakup. Nobody had known where he was. What the officers found in the house was worse than what I had seen. In one of the upstairs closets, they found the evidence of how long he had been there before I arrived. Beer cans, food wrappers, a blanket. He had been living inside that closet for several days, moving through the house while I was out, listening while I slept, waiting for something I still don't fully understand. Tucked into his belt loop when they arrested him was a kitchen knife. The officer who told me this said it quietly and watched my face while he said it. I think he wanted me to understand what that detail meant without having to say it plainly. I understood. I had checked those locks 3 times. I had been so focused on what might come through the door from outside that it never once occurred to me to think about what was already inside. He was in that closet when I arrived. He was in that closet when I checked the locks. He was in that closet when I finally fell asleep. I went outside for a cigarette and walked into a kitchen where a man with a knife had been living in my rented home for days. I don't smoke anymore. I am not someone who scares easily. I want to be clear about that before I tell you this story, because for a long time I convinced myself that nothing had actually happened, that it was a strange night and a strange coincidence, and I had made it into something bigger than it was. It took other people hearing the story and reacting with alarm to make me understand what I had actually been in the middle of. This happened a few years ago. I had driven 5 hours for a job interview in a state I'd never worked in before. My fiancée suggested I find somewhere to stay the night rather than drive 5 hours back immediately after. She found an Airbnb 10 minutes from the interview location and booked it for me. The host was friendly and communicative. He even offered to let me in early so I could settle in and prepare before the interview rather than arriving exhausted. The interview went well. I came back to the house, ate, called my fiancée, watched a movie on the big couch in the living room, and was asleep within 15 minutes of pressing play. The doorbell woke me at 11:33. I looked at my phone, looked at the door, lay there for a moment waiting to understand if I dreamed it. It rang again, then again. Each time it rang, something shifted uncomfortably in my chest. Not fear. Annoyance mixed with something I didn't have a name for yet. On the 4th ring, I got up. I looked through the front window before I opened the door. A thin man stood on the porch with his head angled downward and a small brown paper bag held out in front of him like an offering. Not a pizza box, a brown paper bag. He was almost motionless. I opened the inner door and left the screen door latched. The porch light was dim and his face was hard to read. Without looking up, he told me he had my pizza delivery. I told him I hadn't ordered anything, that he had the wrong address. I closed the door. The bell rang again. I went back, opened the door again. He said the same thing in the same flat voice. Pizza delivery. I told him again that he was wrong. While I was speaking, I noticed his hand had moved to the handle of the screen door. I told him to leave or I would call the police. I slammed the door and went to the side window to watch him. He stood on the porch for another full minute. Then he walked to a red sedan with a broken front headlight and got in. I exhaled. I was still watching through the window when I realized the car had not moved. The headlight was shining into the room. He was still in the driveway with the engine running, and I could not see him clearly through the glare. I went upstairs to get a better angle from the bedroom window. From above, I could see the car clearly, running, headlight on. But I couldn't see anyone in the driver's seat. I went back downstairs and out the front door. The car was still running. The driver's door was closed. No one inside. I turned around and went back into the house and locked everything I could find to lock, including the chain on the front door. I went upstairs and sat on the bedroom floor with my phone and waited. Sometime later, I looked out the window and saw him climbing back into the driver's seat from the direction of the house. Not from the street, from the direction of the house. He backed out of the driveway and drove away. I did not sleep. I spent the rest of the night on the bedroom floor watching videos on my phone with the volume low, listening to every sound the house made. At 4 a.m, I got up, packed my things, and walked to the front door. The front door was unlocked and standing slightly open. The chain had caught it. Without the chain, it would have been wide open. I had locked that door. I was certain of it. I was certain of the chain and certain of the deadbolt. But the deadbolt had been opened. I moved to my car as fast as I could without running. At the end of the street sat a green house with a red car in the driveway. Broken front headlight. On the side of the porch I had just left, in the spot I had run straight past in my rush, sat the brown paper bag. Still there. Right where he had put it when he came back. I have never gone back to look inside that bag. I have thought about it many times. I have thought about what was in it and what would have happened if the chain had not caught. I have thought about where he went when he got out of that car and what he was doing in the time before he climbed back in. The Airbnb listing no longer exists. The host never replied to my message. Some questions have answers that are worse than not knowing. I have decided the brown paper bag is one of them. My family has not been the same since last summer. I want to say that plainly at the start because I think people underestimate what an experience like this does to the people who go through it together. The physical danger passed in a single night. The damage it left behind has not. We had planned a short family vacation, my wife, my 8-year-old son, my 13-year-old daughter, and me. A few nights at the ocean, nothing elaborate. My wife found a house on Airbnb that was a 5-minute walk from the beach and significantly cheaper than anything directly on the water. It sat at the end of a dead-end street with a creek running behind it and trees on 3 sides. Private and quiet. Exactly what we wanted. We arrived in the afternoon, spent hours on the beach, and came back sunburned and happy. My kids, who normally argue constantly, had spent the entire day playing together at the water's edge, like they actually liked each other. My wife made a home-cooked meal. We played cards until the kids got tired. I slept better than I had in months. My son did not. He came to breakfast the next morning looking like he hadn't closed his eyes once. He was quiet and kept his head down, and when I finally got him to tell me what was wrong, he said he had seen ghosts in the backyard. My 8-year-old son said he had seen multiple dark shapes moving through the yard from the tree line to the house. That one of them had come up close to his window, that one of them had turned and waved at him. We told him what parents tell children, that ghosts aren't real, that it was a dream, that the shadows were just trees moving in the wind. He cried for a while and then seemed to accept it. We went back to the beach. He was himself again by the afternoon. When we returned to the house that evening, the front door was unlocked. My wife wasn't sure if she had locked it. I told myself it was her. I told myself this because the alternative was something I wasn't willing to look at yet. That night, the kids went to bed around 10. My wife and I stayed up for another hour or so. Just before midnight, my son knocked on our bedroom door, shaking so badly he could barely form words. He said the ghosts were back. He said one of them had tapped on his bedroom window. He said it had spoken to him through the glass. He said it told him that if he screamed, it would hurt his entire family. That if he wanted it to leave, he needed to open the door. He had not screamed. He had not opened the door. He had come to us instead. I stood at every window in the house looking into the backyard. The floodlight at the rear of the property had triggered and was on. I told myself an animal had set it off. I told myself my son had had a nightmare so vivid it had followed him into waking. I told myself the words he had just repeated to me could not have been spoken by something at his window. My son slept between us that night. I lay awake listening to him shake for hours. The next day I suggested we all sleep together in the living room, camp out, make a fort. The kids were thrilled with the idea, and my son smiled genuinely for the first time since the first night. We played games on the floor and eventually fell asleep, tangled up in blankets with the lights still on. At 2:30 in the morning, my son shook me awake. I sat up expecting to reassure him again. 3 figures stood at the sliding glass door at the back of the house. They were dressed entirely in black, with hoods pulled up over their heads. Each one wore a mask. Black base, with wide circular white eyes that reflected the interior light of the room back at us. They stood completely still for the moment it took me to understand what I was looking at. Then One of them reached out and tried the handle of the sliding door. It was locked. The door held. My wife and daughter woke from the sound of me scrambling to my feet, and when they saw the figures, they began screaming. My daughter grabbed her phone and called 911. I found a heavy walking stick that had been left inside the house and put myself between my family and the glass. The figures did not run. They did not flinch at the screaming. One of them tilted his head slowly to one side. Another one, the one on the left, pulled out a knife and moved it back and forth in the light, coming through the glass. Deliberately, slowly, like a performance, like they wanted us to see it. They had not come to rob an empty house. They had come to be watched. They had come to let us see what they were holding and what they were capable of, and to make us understand that the only thing between us and them was a single pane of glass. I do not know how long we stood there. It felt like a very long time. Then the figure at the far right of the door disappeared. Not stepped away. Disappeared. One moment present, and then gone in a fraction of a second. I heard something happening outside that I couldn't see. Then the second figure turned and ran, then the third. The police had come through the tree line from the back of the property. All three were caught before they reached the creek. When the officers brought them around to the front of the house and I saw their faces, for the first time I felt something I had not expected. They were young. Two of them were 20 years old. One was 18. They looked like people I might see in a coffee shop or at a gas station. Ordinary faces under extraordinary masks. Each of them was carrying a knife when they were searched. The officers told me that there was a known group in the area who targeted vacationing families specifically. The logic being that tourists carry cash, carry valuables, and when they have children with them, they are easier to manage through fear. The officers said it without particular alarm, like it was a known problem and not an emergency, like it was the kind of thing that happened regularly enough to be ordinary. That detail frightened me more than almost anything else from that night. What my son had described on the first night was real. The shapes moving through the yard, the figure at the window, the words spoken through the glass, all of it real. He had been alone in his room in the dark with a masked stranger inches away from his face, and he had not screamed, and he had not opened the door, and he had come to find me instead. He is 8 years old. The police believed they would not have physically harmed us, that it was about money and intimidation, and that the violence was implied rather than intended. I have thought about that assessment many times since. I have thought about what it means to believe that a group of masked men with knives standing at your family's door in the middle of the night while your children scream would have stopped at a certain point on their own. I am not sure I believe it. The mental scars from that trip have outlasted everything else. The sunburn faded. The good memories from the beach are still there somewhere. But my son still checks his bedroom window before he sleeps. My daughter still flinches at sliding doors. And I still think about the second night. The night I stood at every window looking into the dark backyard, convincing myself there was nothing there. They were already in those trees, watching me look for them. 3 files closed for tonight. If these stories made you think twice about where you sleep tonight, good. That is exactly where we want you. Hit subscribe and turn on the bell. Mr. Night Files is here every week with real stories from real people in places that were supposed to be safe. Share this one with someone who thinks checking the reviews is enough. One last thing before you go. Tonight, when you walk into a room that feels slightly wrong, don't tell yourself it's just nerves. Don't turn the light off and go back to sleep. Your body knows things your brain hasn't caught up to yet. Listen to it. I'll see you in the next file, if you make it there.